your colleagues say in academia?
Well, they looked at me as a weird kind of guy, because everybody was into genes. Genes were that was before the Genome Project. That was the building up of our genetic repertoire of like everything's genes. And I'm the only guy out there in the corner going, it's not the genes. And they looked at me like the only guy out there in the corner and sort of dismissed it because it didn't fit their conventional story. As a matter of fact, the first time I gave a lecture on it in front of my colleagues, I had left the university, but I'd come back because I needed a scientific audience to describe what I was working on. At the end of my talk, I said, thank you very much. And this room full of people, they just stared at me it was dead silent. I felt like really crazy. I was in front of the room. I said, thank you, and they just stared at me. And one guy in the back of the room, I remember he went twice. I mean, it was so clear. And when he did that, everybody looked at him. And then he just put his hands down in his lap. And then about a minute later, they all stood up and they walked out, all my colleagues. And I thought I was crazy.
Why does this happen? Why does that kind of thing happen? Because we think science is fact, but science is based on what's in vogue, right? And it's based on trends and all of that stuff, going back to Galileo or any of these things.
Every time a scientist has come up with a new idea, that scientist was always claimed as being weird or crazy or, way off track. And then those new ideas come in. Howard Temin.
Or sometimes they're just the weirdo.
Well, yeah, that's where you got to have to distinguish. Where does weirdo leave off and interesting person begin? Okay, and the fact was this: my research was repeatable every day, and you could predict it. The point about that is, in science, prediction means you understand something. If you can predict it before you do it, then you have some insight. My predictions were always accurate. It just didn't fit the conventional storyline. And there was a choice, recant, you're a heretic, recant and just say, okay, I was wrong. And I said, no. Every time I was looking around, the results were coming in different ways from different places. So I held on to that. And it took about 20 years before science owned what I was talking about and gave it the name epigenetics. That's the new science.
Okay, which is the belief that through your behavior you can kind of alter your genetics, pass those on, express it differently. I'm probably using the wrong words.
Well, pretty close right now.
People talk about it as a reality, although it's still not totally understood or totally believed.
But it can't be replicated. It is now. It is a science. It's a hard science, and it's the leading edge. Now, I'll tell you where the problem comes from. Not so much the scientists, but the pharmaceutical industry. And the reason why this becomes important is because the pharmaceutical industry runs the show in medicine. And if you could put this kind of healing that I'm talking about into a capsule or tablet, they'd be talking about it right now. But this is a consciousness healing, and you can't sell it. And so what's the result? They're not interested in it. And they, through their money, which is massive, actually determine the curriculum in a medical school. And the idea is, well, what's relevant? Well, if you understand epigenetics, you don't need the pharmaceutical industry. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's not in the interest of one of the biggest industries on this planet to say you can heal yourself without drugs? And I go, absolutely.
The sun is where I'm at, blazing black, focused on the fact they taking this shit back. This is all we ask, get it shining UV on the track. If we take it back, man, they used to call it niggas fat. Now we shaping that, times I've rearranged this in the past. I ain't faking draft, yeah, I know this is shapes and craft.
Yo, what it do, what it does. Welcome to The Real Story, where we dissect his story and get to the real story. Shout out to the planet. And this video is titled The Science of Language, Etymology, and Epigenetics. So let's just get right into it. So just to start, if we want to define this word etymology, right, we can go to the Merriam-Webster's, dictionary.com, anything like that. Here we see etymology. The etymology of etymology itself is relatively straightforward. Etymon means origin of a word in Latin, and comes from the Greek etymon, meaning literal meaning of a word according to its origin. Greek etymon in turn comes from etmos, which means true. See, everything related to truth, right? Be careful not to confuse etymology with the similar sounding entomology. Entomon means insect in Greek, and entomology is a study of bugs. All right, simple, right? So, to take it a step forward, we go to the etymology dictionary, which is specific to the process of etymology, right? Late 14th century, facts of the origin and development of a word, from Old French etymologie, 14th century, right? This is about the times of the beginning of conquest and the beginning of most of these languages and most of these forms of thought, right? This is where they're being shaped. From Latin, etymologia, from Greek, analysis of a word to find its true origin, properly, study of the true sense, right? True sense, if we stop at that. Now, they put of a word, but just think about that sentence. Study of the true sense. Think about that. Study of a speaking of, right? True sense, original meaning. True, real, actual. So you see all these words that etymology is associated with. True, actual, true sense, real, all that stuff, right? Think about that. Keep that in mind. In the classical times, with reference to meaning later to histories, classical etymologists, Christian and pagan, based their explanations on allegory and guesswork, lacking historical records as well as the scientific method to analyze them, and the discipline fled into disrepute that lasted a millennium. Now, why would you think that is? As a modern branch of linguistic science treating in the origin and evolution of the words from 1640s, as an account of the particular history of a word from 15th century. All right, so we can go down now and let's look at the sort of timeline that they have here of the word and it changing. So you have etymos Greek and logia Greek. Both of those are Greek origin. True, real, actual, and the study of. So you combine that to study of what is true, real, and actual. For the Greeks, now, as we know, European history pretty much begins with Greece and Rome. I think we can pretty much say that that is their main blip on that timeline where we're in this current age. So as we scroll down, right, etymologia, which is Greek, is the analysis of a word to find its true origin, study of the true sense of a word. Now they put of a word, they keep putting that, but if we stop and we don't define it in modern times or even what it actually means, it still means the study of the true sense, right? Etymologia, Latin. So it goes from Greek to Latin, Old French, and then Middle English. Facts of the origin and development of a word. Now that's what it is, right? Now, as far as I'm concerned, I've lived my life not based on etymology up until this point, right? So I'm pretty sure when everyone grew up, we lived our life based on definitions. All right, now if we go to the etymology of definition, late 14th century, definition, right? Decision, setting, or boundaries determined and stating of the limits and distinctive nature of a thing. All right, so we see the words related to boundary, determinations, right? Also limitations, also a statement of the meaning of a word or phrase. Now you see how they add that in there? So that pretty much means it's a statement and determination of a limit or a boundary for a specific word, right? A bounding, a boundary, a limiting, prescribing, a definition, explanation. To limit, determine, explain, from de, completely. To bound, limit, right? And logic, meaning act of stating that's what something means. Is from the 1640s, meaning degree or distinctness of the detail of a picture. It's from 1889. So you see we get these different additions based on certain people's determinations and limits on what words is. It's dependent on some sort of authority, right? Or I guess you could say dominant thought, right? Definition or pertaining to a definition, right? So one aspect of my communications degree that I honed in on was linguistics. Now I've always been a bit of a writer, so I've always been interested in learning about different words and putting them together. Linguistics is a noun, which means the science of languages. It's from 1847, see linguistic. So if linguistics is a science, as per its etymology, then why is it important? It gives one the general context of a word when used in its day. which can spearhead research into a particular time period or historical meaning that has shifted and changed. One such example being the U.S. Census and its history with race, right? The census and the concept of race is fairly recent, going through many changes in the period of decades over time. Without etymology, that context is lost as words and phrases change meaning, due in part to the general changes of a population, but also in terms of manipulation by various forms of media, i.e. the church, news, education, and history. Those three have often found themselves to be pretty much the same thing or occur in the same space. But then why else is it important? Here, let's have Dr. Bruce Lipton give you a little bit of a baseline. Why would you believe me, right?
Coast at MIT. And so I was trained as an engineer, and I was the science kid at school, and I was taught these are this ways, and this is how the world works. And yet, the last 6 years on London Real, I've been talking with people that have incredible ideas about consciousness, about spirituality, about energy. And so when I hear you talking about DNA, which I was taught is one thing, and yet now consciousness and perceptions and beliefs and how it can affect biology, two parts of my brain conflict and collide. I'm sure you get this a lot. And so in one sense, it's like someone is saying what my religion used to be, science, is wrong, and yet part of my heart knows that it's not right. So how does that sound to you?
Well, it's very interesting because I had to deal with the issue of teaching medical students, and going into the classroom, teaching conventional curriculum is the old genes control life story. And so I go in there and teach that to medical students, but when I'd go back in my lab and look at my research on stem cells, my research revealed conclusively that the environment in which the cells live determine genetic activity. So it's complete opposite of what I was teaching in medical school. And the difference is profound. The conventional story, almost everybody's programmed with genes turn on and off, and then they control the character of your life. And if you buy that story, which I did and which I was teaching, it really means that we're victims of our heredity. We didn't pick the genes as far as we know. You don't like the traits, you can't change the genes, and the genes appear to turn on and off by themselves. All of a sudden you see your life is not under your control, it's under the control of the genes. And a lot of people feel that way looking at their family history and going, oh my goodness, I might have the genes for cancer or whatever it is. Once I feed you with an idea that you are susceptible to something, look, I can feed you with an idea that this pill that we just got from the pharmaceutical company, it's the greatest, best thing for your issue. And I give you this pill and you get better. And then later you find out it was a sugar pill, and everybody goes, yeah, that's called the placebo effect. I go, what does it really mean? I said, you didn't get healed by the pill, you got healed by the belief in the pill. And I go, well, yeah, that's what placebo is all about. And at least 1/3, minimum of 1/3 of all medical intervention is it's the placebo effect, where the healing comes from. Everybody goes, yeah, I know about the placebo. I go, yeah, but that's a result of positive thinking. Well, what about negative thinking? And this is what we don't talk about, but the reality is it's equally powerful in regard to affecting your biology as is positive thinking, but it works in the opposite direction. A negative thought is called the nocebo effect. Can cause any disease, and you can die. If you believe you're going to die, you can die from the belief. So we really have to watch out, because as psychologists would tell us, 70% or more of our thoughts are negative and redundant, replaying the same negative thoughts. I go, if thoughts had nothing to do with it, fine. But thoughts, positive or negative, shape our biology. And all of a sudden it says, well, now it's time to wake up, because our negative thinking is manifesting a negative life experience.
Right.
But it's not just me saying this. It was me saying this when I first started doing this work in 1970. And my research was repeatable every day. I could take stem cells are embryonic cells, so they have no potential until you put them in an environment. And then, depending on the culture medium, by the chemistry of the culture medium, I can make the cell become a muscle cell, change the culture medium, make the same cell become a bone cell, or change it again and make the same cell become a fat cell. Genetically, the cell's the same. It was the environment that I was changing. And I started talking about that long before the new science called epigenetics had come into vogue, which was 1990. So I was like 20 years ahead. And of course, for much of that time, my colleagues looked at me like I was a crazy guy, because everybody knew the conventional traditional dogma, and I was, coming up with a whole different line of belief about it, and now it's come into mainstream. The only problem is this: when you invest so much money into a belief system, and then the belief system isn't really right, you try to hold on as long as you can, because you spend hundreds of billions of dollars in this belief. You don't want to just go, oh, okay, we'll just change it. So it's a struggle, but the reality is coming forward, and the public is just becoming aware of it, and it's a revolution because, as I said, if you believe genes control your life, you're a victim of your heredity.
Right. Can you explain epigenetics to people who don't know what that is?
Yeah. Okay. When I say genetic control, that's the belief that genes control our characters. When I say epigenetic control, almost sounds the same, but epi means above. So when I say epigenetic control, literally it's control above the genes. And this is what we now recognize, that the environment, and very specifically our perception of the environment, changes our genetic activity. So that means, well, wait, that's not a victim, because I can change my environment, I can change my perception, and all of a sudden, if I can do that, then I can control my genes. Well, we're going from victim to mastery, from genetics to epigenetics.
Okay.
Now, if I'm being lazy, that's pretty much enough for me to get it. But for people who they live their life by definitions, I'll pull a few extra sources just to keep their hearts at, ease a little bit. Doesn't work well, but whatever. So, cdc.gov, right? What is epigenetics? Your genes play an important role in your health, but so do your behaviors and environment, such as what you eat and how physically active you are. Epigenetics is the study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. Unlike genetic changes, epigenetic changes are reversible and do not change your DNA sequence, but they can change how your body reads a DNA sequence. Gene expression refers to how often and when proteins are created from the instructions within your genes. While genetic changes can alter which protein is made, epigenetic changes often affect gene expression to turn genes on and off. Since your environment and behaviors, such as diet and exercise, can result in epigenetic changes, it is easy to see the connection between your genes and your behaviors and environment. Now, sparing ourselves, every detail on the matter, if we scroll down to the bottom and pretty much summarize this blue box here, pretty much means it turns your genes on and off based on your environment and behaviors. So you may have genes that are locked away, different strands of DNA that are popping up now, right? That may be suppressed by things you do to yourself. Just keep that in mind for the times we live in. Great, right? Great. But what does this all mean exactly? Well, epigenetics is the study of changes in gene expression. This can be likened to experiences in environment in relation to behavior and perceptions of the world. When we think of the use of language, we often simply think of it as things we say and what they mean in the modern day. But it's rare that we accurately assess words as frequency and vibration. Again, the phrase "word sound power" makes its way into one of my videos. When one speaks negative, their life reflects negative, and those genes begin to express themselves to match. One's DNA is not changed, but what genes are expressed are shown more outwardly. A sick mind that speaks sickness may have a body that harbors sickness. And everyone has heard the phrase, "you are what you eat." Things like food and drugs, whatever is fed into the body is equally fed into the mind. Hopefully this is beginning to connect some dots. Whatever you ingest, whether it be mentally, physically, has an effect on your genetic expression, on the way you look, the way you act, the way you think, and the cycles that you repeat over and over again. All right, I know I've been rambling on about this bullshit for a little bit, right? So what does this have to do with etymology again, right? I mean, some of y'all are probably saying that. Well, let's think about it this way. Though common language changes over time, some words through sound and frequency retain their original essence, so to speak, regardless of how it is used today. I've come to understand that words we have used our whole lives have seldom truly been understood because we've never actually gone and learned the essence of these words. In the same way that grammar school children go to grammar school to submit their proficiency with spelling, grammar, mathematics, other forms of education, correct? The etymology of the word spell, it's a verb. It means early 14th century, read letter by letter, write or say the letters of 1400s, form words by means of letters, apparently a French word that merged with or displaced of native Old English one. Both are from the same Germanic root, but the French word had evolved a different sense, right? The true sense, so things begin to change their sense. The native word is Old English spelion, to tell, speak, discourse, talk, from Proto-Germanic spelion, source also of Old High German spelion, to tell, Old Norse, I'm not saying that, Gothic, to talk, tell, right? But the current sense seemed to come from Anglo-French espellar, Old French, means signify, explain, interpret, spell out letters, pronounce, recite, to tell. Now down there at the bottom, we see the term spell is generally used for magical procedures which cause harm or force people to do something against their will, unlike charms for healing, protection, etc. Where have we spent 8 to 10 to 20 years of our lives doing things against our will, right? Some of us longer than that. In general terms, the belief underlying the use of spells is that the wish that they embody will be fulfilled, regardless of its goodness or badness, so long as the formula has been correctly pronounced. Broadly speaking, then spell and prayer, like magic and religion to which they severely belong, can be distinguished by the nature of the intended purposes. So this is from Oxford Dictionary and Encyclopedia Britannica 1941. So they know this shit. Now, as an evil, timeless villain, I would use this information against people as well. Why not? Why not? Why not? They're gonna listen to it. It's gonna work. Why not? Moving on. Grammar, noun, late 14th century, Latin grammar, rules of Latin, from Old English grammaire, grammar, learning, especially Latin philology. Also magic, incantation, spells, mumbo jumbo, 12th century modern French, grammaire, an irregular semi-popular adoption of Latin, grammatica, grammar, philology, perhaps via an unrecorded medieval Latin form, grammariae. The classic Latin word is from Greek, grammatike, art of letters, referring both to philology and to literature in the broadest sense, pertaining to or versed in letters or learning, from gramma, letter. So gramma means letter, right? We've all seen different forms of media where they have a grimoire, right? Grimoire Weiss.
I had my revenge, and now it's over.
Oh, now, see here, this is rich.
Weiss?
We helped you in some mad quest for vengeance, and now you think to bid us adieu? How can a fighter so skilled be cursed with such a thick head? A true warrior would fight. They would give all in the service of their friends.
Friends?
That's right. He's right. Kaine, we're friends now.
See here, that was hardly the point.
Okay, then what is the point? Kaine, we need your help. Will you fight with us?
Fool, you cannot simply ask her outright. There is a proper order to these matters. One must ease into the topic with carefully considered words before commencing negotiations. Book? How dare you? I am Grimoire Weiss, wielder of arcane...
Weiss, then.
Do not abbreviate my name.
You're an ass. But you're right.
Black Clover, I know everybody knows at least one or two more. I mean, if you're a D&D fan or some weird shit, y'all know what the fuck is going on with that. A book of tomes, magic letters, Skyrim. A much broader word in Latin and Greek. Restriction of the meaning to systematic accounts of the rules and usage of language. It is post-classical development until 16th century, limited to Latin, and reference to English usage by the late 16th century. The rules of a language to which speakers and writers must conform. Sounds like a definition, correct? We see more limits and determinations. The sense evolution is characteristic of the Dark Ages. Learned in general, knowledge peculiar to the learned classes, which included astrology and magic. Hence the second meaning of occult knowledge. Important. So anything occult in reference to grammar, etymology, true sense, true meaning. That's very important. At the bottom of the page, grammarian. Let's look at that one for a minute. Late 14th century. Again, another 14th, between 12th to 14th century. Writer on Latin grammar, philologist, etymologist, in general use, learned man, from Old French grammarian, wise man, person who knows Latin, magician, agent, noun from grammaire. That's crazy, right? So if you're a grammarian, if you're someone who studies grammar, that means you're a learned man. You know, or a magician, right? Magic, invocation. Now down here at the timeline of the changes, we have gramma, Greek, back to the Greeks, grammatica, Latin, grammaire, Old French, and grammar, which is what we use today. So this is important to see how these letters change as we get towards English. We haven't even really touched on it yet. We're just looking at some of the words and just going back, getting some reference, getting a little baseline so that we can break it down, really see what it is. So just to summarize a little bit of what we read, when we observe the meaning of these words, we see that the history of their meaning can be traced back to the ideals of magic, magicians, and obscure knowledge, occult or gnostic knowledge. Grammarian typically meaning learned man or magician, and sure, without going into magic thinking, lightning bolts and magic wands and summoning swords and giant mediums, let's think about it in terms of inducing, manipulating, and incanting or enchanting. Knowing the history of modern languages shows you just how young they are in general scope of reality. Most of those words and their origin have either Greek or Roman roots, like I've said before, and they quickly shift based on the general shifts in culture and ideals. But there is one section of society where these original definitions are still somewhat found, and that's law. Ever heard of legalese? It refers to the technical jargon used in legal contracts and courtrooms, presumably across the world, though in this case we'll stick to English-speaking countries. Why are technical uses required? It's pretty simple. Countries operate much like corporations today, so regulating needs to be precise to the words and phrases being incanted on society. Without going too deep into the law itself, I'm not a lawyer, by the way, it shows us that there is some backdoor code that is usually underneath the general use of the English language, because the English used today is a trade language. There's those that argue it is either a Creole or a Pidgin, though it is credited with the Germanic and Anglo origin. When we examine the language, we see that there are heavy Latin and French influences. What cannot be argued is that English itself is a lingua franca, a term meaning Frankish language. These sorts of languages are ones that derive themselves from the other Romance languages, including French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, all of which descend from Vulgar Latin, i.e. Rome. This historically means that English itself is the second dumbing down or derivation of the Roman dialect and its children, second generation basically. Each of these notions have some colonial or imperial history of subjugation to the natural people of this planet and creating societies where they once thrived. So we see that in pretty much every major city in the world. They're built on top of the backs of the organic people. No one can argue this today. It is what it is today for now, but we're pretty much still acting like Romans. Just to make it clear. When people say Rome fell, it just changed names. Now, where we are now, knowing this information, we knowingly use their language without proper context. So when, just to bring it home, when black people refer to themselves as black, that frequency without context, they're inducing a certain change in their genetics. Likewise, when people call themselves by a nationality or a religious title, or they associate themselves with something small, defined, limited, their genes reflect that limited way of thinking. It's the reason why everything on the planet is smaller now. It's the reason why there are things we can't repeat, like the pyramids. A lot of people believe they can with rope pulleys, and I mean, if we can't even do it with modern technology, it doesn't make any sense to me, personally. I just think that we've devolved over time rather than evolved as the evolution theory tells us, right? Just to keep that on the front end. So when a child hears a certain frequency or tone from the womb and beyond the womb, this in turn changes their genetic expression. It changes how their cells interpret and which genes are turned on and off. Genes more in line with disease may have more of an expression than those which give strength and vitality. A little intuition makes it easy to draw these connections between language and genetic expression. In the cases of a language like English, these lingua franca are often used by people with no native language. Many Aboriginal Americans have lost traditional language to conquest, and as a result, to this day, use an abridged Frankish version of languages of old.
And if you change the lifestyle, you don't have to worry about the gene. But the problem is 95% of our life is coming from the programs of life, how to live life that we get in the first 7 years of life. The movie The Matrix is not science fiction. It's a documentary. Every human, and this is a fact, every human first 7 years is download a hypnosis. The brain of a child under 7 is in a lower vibrational frequency. When you put wires on a person's head, you read electroencephalograph, reading brain activity. A child below 7 has a lower vibration than consciousness. It's called theta. Theta is imagination. Oh, that's how kids play tea party with mud pies, but to them it's a real thing. A kid rides a broom, it's a horse. That's theta, imagination. Theta is also hypnosis. And the idea is this: before you can become conscious, if you don't have any programs, what are you going to be conscious of? It's sort of like I buy a new iPod and I take it out of the box and I push play and nothing happens, and you think, oh my God, I spent all the money and the damn thing isn't working. And then some little 7-year-old kid comes up and says, well, mister, you didn't download any music, how are you going to play something? And I go, that's the same thing. It's like the brain is like the iPod. Consciousness is the screen where I can create. But if I don't have anything in the hard drive, I can't create. So nature makes the first 7 years. What kind of programs are required to live on this planet? I say, how do you get them? Theta is hypnosis. You just watch. You watch your parents, you watch your siblings, and your community, because you have to learn how many 100,000 rules. Think about it. Just to be a functional member of a family and a functional member of a community, there are rules. I got to teach an infant these rules. It's like, you don't have to. First 7 years, they observe it and just download it. And then I say, why is it relevant? Because this is the unfortunate fact. 95% of our life, this is a fact, comes from those programs in the subconscious. Every day, only about 5% of the life are you using conscious, which is creative. 5%.
So your life is being lived, even though you think you're living your life.
Exactly, and you don't see it because it's called subconscious, below conscious. And the Jesuits, for 400 years, they were boasting. People didn't understand. They say, give me a child until it's 7 and I will show you the man. They've been saying that for 400 years because they knew 7 years was the program period. And 95% of your life after that will be whatever that program is. So a child is going to record for 7 years. And they're going to record you. You have a new baby. That baby is going to look at you because you are the parent. The first thing swing, the kid gets back up on the swing. It's reflection. So you have to recognize a child is going to observe every move of you. Then you also have to recognize, well, hell, if 95% of it is coming from my invisible programming, I'm going to pass on the family pattern unconsciously 95% of the day.
Family, country, society, pattern.
The whole pattern, whatever the pattern of growing up, the programming, the conscious effort to change your programming. It's very hard to stay conscious. This is why we always go back into the subconscious, because when you're thinking, that's a conscious mind function. So, Brian, what are you doing on Tuesday? If I ask you that, the answer's not out here, it's inside. So the moment you're thinking, you let go of driving the vehicle because you went inside. I go, well, it doesn't mean whatever you're doing, you stop walking or driving the car or doing a job. Those are programs in the subconscious because you've repeated them over and over again. So the subconscious is autopilot. When the conscious is busy, autopilot drives the vehicle. Point is, when conscious is busy, it's not observing what's going on. 95% of your life is coming from the subconscious. Your life is a printout of your subconscious behavior. So you don't have to try and think about what happened. I just say, look at your life. The things you like that come into your life come in because you have a program that supports them. But anything you struggle with, work hard at, put a lot of effort into making it happen, why you're working so hard, inevitably you have a program that doesn't support that conclusion and you're trying to override the program. So you don't need to do a lot of shrink and psychology stuff. You just look at your life and say, where am I struggling? Because wherever you're struggling, inevitably it's a program in your subconscious that does not support that destination you've been looking for.
Okay, so it's all, the evidence is all there. You take an honest look at your life and your history, whether it's anything in your life, relationships or business or this or that, and then that'll point to you where there's some kind of incongruence.
Right.
That you kind of went from A to B.
I have two different lives in this lifetime. Before I put this knowledge into effect and after I put this knowledge into effect, and I use the word put into effect. Why? I had the knowledge academically. It's like, oh my God, look at the research. What does it mean? I understood it from the level. And with all that knowledge, it didn't change my life. People read self-help books. I go, well, you read the book, you got a lot of knowledge. I say, is your life changed? No, but you got a lot of knowledge. And so here's the difference. The conscious mind is creative and can learn in any number of ways. Read a self-help book, go to a lecture, listen to this program, and conscious mind's going to get some awareness. And I go, yeah, but subconscious mind doesn't learn that way. I go, right, it doesn't. Subconscious mind learns in two fundamental ways naturally. Hypnosis, which is the first 7 years. And after age 7, how do you put new programs in? Repetition. Practice. You want to drive a car, you didn't learn how by just getting in the seat and put the key in. You had to practice driving the car. You want to learn the alphabet. How many times did you go from A to Z? Try to go to A to Z before you can complete it. Once you completed it, you didn't have to go back and do it again. So 2 phases. You want to train the subconscious mind. Hypnosis. Repetition. I like the last one because there's a new phrase that's bandied about called fake it till you make it. Meaning, if you're not a happy person, I say, you want to be a happy person? Then repeat it all the time. I'm happy. I'm happy. I say, well, you don't look happy or anything. He says, no, who am I talking to? By repetition, I'm talking to subconscious. If subconscious gets, I am happy, and 95% of your life comes from that subconscious, there will be a point once the subconscious got, I am happy, you don't have to say it again.
Okay.
It'll be automatic.
And that's why we see people do affirmations and gratitude journals and stuff, because if you do that daily...
It's repetitive. That's the secret part. Putting a sticky note on the refrigerator is more like a suggestion, but it's not a repetition. So it doesn't work very well. But you have to do... Repetition is a habit. It's making habit. So you got to do something religiously in the sense of repeating it to make it work.
If you enjoyed that Linda Real interview, make sure to check out their channel and go ahead and look up Dr. Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief, if you want to know more about consciousness and etymology. And in our next video, we're going to be talking more about symbology and its relation to etymology and human consciousness as a whole. So enjoy, and I'll catch y'all on the next. Peace.
Now look, we making a choice. Bring it back to the beginning, separate position, operate from your poise. Crack your purpose with precision, I envision the voice. I observe from a position high above, they rejoice. Ain't no bad thoughts. Niggas out here, they be tripping off them bad songs. Grab a mic and in a minute, I'ma blast off. Yeah, I'm surfing in the ocean like a cast off. I mean cast away. Baby call my name and I slash the waves. She know that in my mind I'm tryna pass the phase. Build it with the